This is yours? Okay. All right, a couple other housekeeping. So the code here is for the Slack channel, which I think you still have a 90. I don't think it's been converted to a, it's in process. Okay, anyway, that's the Slack channel link. If you want to just type it in, that's a link for the Slack channel. And then if you have Wi-Fi, you want to get Wi-Fi. There you go. All right, does it work, the link? I hope so. Okay, all right. So, you know, there's this new thing that people are all excited about, but we're not sure exactly what's to come with it. So I figured we might as well talk about, you know, it's a big gorilla in the room that's pervading many conversations. It's all around, of course, this thing called AI. So the question is, what's next? And what should we anticipate? And how should we even think about it? And again, originally I was going to have this as a philosophy track talk, so you'll get a sense of how how the philosophy track will operate. At the same time, again, I think there's some real practical things that we need to deal with as we think through this problem space. So to give you a quick perspective, some historical view, I gave this talk actually 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, even at a previous ACoD. And in it, I gave this whole history of IT and security. And as a part of that, I pointed out there was an interesting phenomenon that emerged, which was in each of these eras, we solved a different problem. But each of these eras mapped nicely also to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So we had an identified problem in the 80s, a protect problem in the 90s, a detect problem in the 2000s, and a respond problem in the 2010s, which naturally, if you know the NIST cybersecurity framework, you know that the 2020s is a recover problem. Okay, if you haven't seen this presentation, it's called the DIE triad. The point here is not to talk about the DIE triad. The point is to say, what happens in the 2030s? No, it's not govern. So the NIST cybersecurity framework is adding govern into the mix. I think govern is something that lives on the bottom across all these things, okay? So govern is not a new stage in my view. It's a stage that's always been around. At least that's my opinion, but hey, you tell them, you can, whatever. Okay, so the question is, what happens after the 2020s, okay? And my view is that in the 2030s, we're gonna have a new set of challenges that will make cybersecurity pale in comparison, okay? We think we have big challenges today in cybersecurity, and we do. But in the 2030s, we're going to have a new set of challenges that are just going to make this seem like cakewalk. And I'm sure you can figure out what that looks like, right? What that might be, right? So to understand what the 2030s might look like, and really in some respects even now, since we're seeing this massive infusion of interest in artificial intelligence, one of the models that I've used to understand the space is what is called the DIKW pyramid. So the DIKW pyramid is a simple construct, data, information, knowledge, wisdom. As you go up the pyramid, there's more value, it requires more context, and it confers greater understanding. Now, here's the exercise I want you guys to go through. So take the word data and consider words that come after it. So what are some words that typically come after data? Data science, data management, database, data analysis, data classification, data engineering, data storage. Okay, so the word you use, now put the word information next to it, okay? And you may wonder, like, what exactly is, like some of these make sense, like information classification, information security, information engineering. What exactly is information engineering? I'm not sure, okay? Now do the same again for knowledge, all right? And I would argue, yeah, what exactly is knowledge science and all these other words that we end up with? I would argue that ChatGPT has opened up this new knowledge economy, okay? And now we have all these knowledge-oriented needs. And these knowledge-oriented needs, when an organization is able to capitalize on this, they become a generative enterprise or a cognitive enterprise, okay? Now, okay, I'm gonna explain what these terms are, or I'm gonna try to explain some of these terms, but that's really part of the exercise. Like what exactly is knowledge engineering, knowledge lake, knowledge platform, and whatever word that you chose, okay, what exactly is that follows the word data, but now, and then follows the word information, and now follows the word knowledge, okay? Well, let me show you one of those. We'll start with knowledge engineering, all right? What is knowledge engineering? Well, okay, I think people kind of have an idea what data engineering is, okay? If you look up information engineering, you'll find you'll find a definition of that. But when you search on knowledge engineering, you get this. Knowledge engineering is a field of artificial intelligence. It's the first mention. If you look at data engineering, if you look at information engineering, you don't hear anything about artificial intelligence. But when you search on knowledge engineering, the first hit shows you, it says it's a field of artificial intelligence. Huh. Okay, that's interesting, right? I heard data management earlier. Okay, so there's information management, there's knowledge management, right? And knowledge management's been around for a long time. There's nothing new with knowledge management, or at least the term knowledge management. We've heard that term for a while. And when we think about knowledge management, it's the practice of taking all this content. I'm not going to call it information, but, well, we'll call it information, that's fine. We're taking all this information and organizing and storing it and disseminating it out for people to use. But I'm sure if anyone's ever gone through the whole exercise of knowledge management or knowledge management systems, you realize they suck, right? They've sucked badly. And why do you think they suck so badly? They're dumb, but how are they dumb? Like, what is it that you get that makes you frustrated? It's hard to find what you're looking for, okay? It's capturing, I don't know if I would say it's implicit knowledge, but what you get back when you query a knowledge management system, the old knowledge management system, is you get back a bunch of information, okay? You just get a bunch of links back, or you get a bunch of documents that you have to now process, right?
So it's basically just a search engine?
It's a search engine that returns a bunch of work that you have to do, right? And that's why it's frustrating. It's not a knowledge management. So think about it in the sense of how we operate. Like, what we want to do is to emulate a system where I go to a colleague and I ask the colleague, hey, how do I get this? How do I do whatever, okay? And what they tell you is, oh, this is how you do it. They don't say, oh, go read this book or this set of documents, right? But that's what knowledge management systems in the past have done. They say, here's a bunch of information, not knowledge. So think about this in another way. Data is, let's say, a bunch of websites. Information is like Google. Then ChatGPT is knowledge. So what ChatGPT is returning is not data and information. It's actually the answer you were looking for. So yeah, let's assume that by the way, there's an interesting story on hallucinations, by the way. But let's assume that it's actually returning a correct result. But nonetheless, the synthesis of it is what we've been asking for in knowledge management. And might we be getting that now? Okay. By the way, a real quick story on hallucinations. There's a well-documented medical case of a girl that was undergoing open brain surgery. She was conscious, and the surgeon would stimulate a certain part of her brain, and she would start to laugh. And so the surgeon would ask her, why did you laugh? And she would answer, oh, it's because of what you're wearing is funny. They would stimulate her brain again, and they would ask, and she would say, oh, it's because of the picture on the wall is funny. Zap it again, oh, because whatever she was seeing at the time caused her to think it was funny. In other words, she was hallucinating. So we've been trying to, our goal is to try to mimic the functions of a brain effectively. And what does a brain do? Well, it hallucinates. All right, so you have all these different types of, again, needs that we will have in this generative enterprise, all right? What is a generative enterprise? Ever heard that term before? Have you never heard, and has anyone ever heard the term generative enterprise before? I didn't make this up. There actually is a term called generative enterprise. And it precedes, of course, generative AI. And it comes from Westrom's typology of organizational culture. So actually, I don't know when he put this together, but if you read Gene Kim's stuff, IT Revolution stuff, he references this a lot. But there's 3 different types of cultures. And I've put a bunch of additional words, but the original words that Westrom used was pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. The other words that I put in are words that were added on by other people. They give you a sense of what the original intention was. But I found it very interesting that he had a label for this, quote, generative enterprise, okay? And you can see the progression or the interesting aspects of what makes up each of these different types of organizations. I think one of the reasons why these other words were added, like aggressive or fixed or growth, was because pathological just sounds really awful, right? Anyone want to work in a pathological organization? Like nobody, right? Yes, unfortunately, many of us have been in such organizations or bureaucratic ones, right? But nonetheless, there's some other words that were used to try to describe the nature of this. But you can see the different aspects of what makes up these organizations. And of course, on the far right, you see the word generative, okay? So let me go back to this perspective. I think many of us hope to be able to work in a generative enterprise, an enterprise that is growing, that's performance-oriented, where you have these attributes. You have these attributes of an organization that seems like the kind of place that we all want to work, okay? Now the challenge is, how do we do that? How do we move into that? How do we move into that sort of environment? And might I argue that perhaps one way to think about it is to say, how do we enable these types of capabilities to accelerate every organization towards a generative enterprise? I didn't use this word. I didn't make up this word, generative enterprise. I think it fits really well, though, with what is happening in the AI space around generative AI. Okay, and whether the association there was ever explicit or not, I think we should use it to our advantage to say that these tools can help us actually achieve moving towards this goal of the kind of organization that we all want to work for or run. Now, Westrom actually provides 3 characteristics of what this generative enterprise really, three overriding characteristics. And I just found it very interesting. This was written well. I mean, this is like almost 2 decades old, okay? And you read these, and you would think that this describes ChatGPT. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, the goals are. So I mean, and I think that maybe there's some things that could perhaps be tuned a little bit better. But the goal of what we're trying to do in this type of new environment, this new ecosystem, that's again embodied in this knowledge layer, is to do those things that Westrom talks about. How do we have information flows in such a way that we can get knowledge out, disseminated as broadly as possible, where people really understand their purpose and the functions that they perform at work, and so on and so on, okay? High cooperation. I mean, all these different aspects are things that I think we all welcome, right? And that sounds great. Yes? Okay. Well, let me tell you a lesson that we learned. Anyone familiar with the term Vantu? Was anyone ever involved in the rollout of Vantu when it was actually called Vantu before Symantec? Yeah, yeah.
We had a custom implementation to look at social security numbers and stuff like that.
Yeah. And Claude, you were familiar with Vantu way early on? Pre-Symantec. Yeah, so that's the story I want to hear. So Claude, tell us what happened. So do you remember how Vantu sold? Like what their demos involved? Like what kind of things they showed? So found so much stuff that no one knew about. Do you have any recollection of what kind of stuff that included? Yeah, those are no. That's pretty tame. Like credit card. I mean, that's like yeah, we shouldn't be sharing that stuff. Do you think you know what else it found? These were the true. We were concerned about true positives, certain types of true positives. Well, when we rolled out Vantu, we ended up finding all this unethical stuff from executives, okay? And that created a crisis. It created an executive crisis. So what do I mean by that? We all would love to live in this generative enterprise, but we know we have executives that also operate who are pathological and bureaucratic in nature, right? And so they're gonna stiffly push back against this. They're gonna say, hold on, I don't want to, well, first, again, if they're actually exhibiting the unethical behavior, then they're gonna just crush it, right? They're gonna be like, no, we cannot roll this out. Even though it may help us do whatever, help it accelerate the business, they're gonna be like, if it uncovers unethical behavior on my part, I'm gonna be stiffly resistant to it because that's that person's head on the line, right? And Vantu was a really good example of when Vantu found lots of bad things, right? And you can I won't go into details on what kind of bad things you can imagine, but there's a lot of bad things that Vantu discovered, not because it was trying to, but because that was just kind of like what it was doing, right? And so it was interesting because you ended up people wanting to kill the Vantu projects not because it didn't work, but because it caught them in doing all these unethical things. So what should we expect? All right, if what will emerge through this generative enterprise is broader sharing of knowledge, broader sharing of information and data all across the board, what kind of unethical behaviors might it uncover? And as a result, who will be dead set against that? Right. This is the layer 8 aspect of the problem, right? The tackling a whole nother type of issue that we're going to have to struggle through. All right, so let's go back to this again. Each of these different knowledge-oriented solutions will require some kind of, or knowledge-oriented needs will require some sort of solution. And I think this space is immense. Immense in terms of the opportunity for value capture. There's gonna be tons of value creation, but also value capture in the sense of startups or new enterprises or new companies or whatever it is that can say, okay, how do I deliver these sort of things? The question for us is, what do these things mean, okay? I can give you the shape of what they are because we've seen them in other places, but I'm not sure if I can tell you the full content of what they are. And so really it's up to us to figure that out, an opportunity for us to say, what exactly is a knowledge lake? What exactly is a knowledge pipeline? Let me give you an example of one of these though, like knowledge provenance. What do you think that means?
How provable it is?
Provable? Oh, right, where did it come from? And where are we seeing this problem now? Yes, yes. But it's manifesting as, hey, I think this is my copyrighted material, right? Did it originate from copyrighted material? What's the provenance of this knowledge, okay? Now, I think there's, anyway, there's some issues about whether or not that's a really big concern, but nonetheless, it characterizes a actual concern that people are bringing forward, saying, I need to understand the provenance of this content. Did it come from copyrighted material? Did it come from J.K. Rowling's books? Did it come from whatever it might be? And if it did, well, that's a problem, okay? And so knowledge provenance is a manifestation of that, that need. How do we solve that need? I don't know, okay? But at least I can now express the problem. And once you express the problem, now you know, okay, how do we work towards a solution? What about like knowledge classification? What do you think that means? Because we know what data classification means, and we know what well, we think we know what information classification means. What do you think knowledge classification means?
What encyclopedias do.
I'm sorry?
What encyclopedias do. They organize.
Oh, like the Dewey Decimal System. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. Never thought of that. Trade. Well, what about trade secrets?
Well, you mean classification like top secret?
So like a label.
So trade secret means knowledge that would be treated with more confidentiality than other knowledge.
How would that? Well, I would ask, how would that be different than information classification? It's about the context. Yes. Maybe the utility as well. Anyway, I would say it's like, for example, understanding need to know. Right? It's not saying, like you may be clear to TS, SCI, full scope poly, blah, 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 but it doesn't mean that you have need to know, right? So there's some sort of, how do I determine need to know, right? Yeah, actually, that's a great way to put it. Compartmentalization is a knowledge classification activity, okay? And now we've unleashed this knowledge. The question is, how are we going to do that? Okay? Bob?
So one of the aspects of need to know was whether or not a particular piece of data is discoverable, or should it be discoverable, and by who, right? So this is something that we've used on pen tests as well. It's not just, hey, this classification and these identities, but if you do these following things, you may now need to know this other thing, and how are we going to make it discoverable, which means it's readable, without making it readable to everyone. There's a huge gray area that's undefined. If you think classification would be a practiced set of behaviors, right? And discoverability kind of is very well not practiced.
Yes, and these are different layers of abstraction as well. So data is very discrete, concrete, specific. Information is an abstraction of that. Knowledge is a further abstraction of that, right? By the way, I should mention wisdom on the top, since it's been there and I haven't mentioned it. But what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is still a very essential attribute that I don't think machines have at this point in time. But we hope that people have that. Okay, we can call wisdom things like discernment, just being able to really have critical thinking, right? So the way you can think about wisdom is, if you take the output of ChatGPT and submit it as case law, as is, then you are not practicing good wisdom, and you get what you deserve. Okay. If you are exposed to lots of rampant disinformation and whatnot, and you're not discerning about what it's telling you, well, then you're not exercising any form of wisdom. You may get a lot of, quote, knowledge by watching endless YouTubes, but you should be practicing wisdom. And right now, clearly machines lack this ability, as well as, unfortunately, significant parts of the US population. But that's it. The exercising of wisdom is still an essential component that we humans should be advocating for and not turning over to machines, okay? All right, so this other perspective is, I would also offer, when we think about the nature of security itself and our role, there's another exercise we can do, which is to add words around data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So let's consider that too. So let's wrap a certain set of words around data, like chief data officer. And then information, chief information officer. So naturally, chief knowledge officer. The question is, who is that? Okay? And what are the necessary functions? What are the necessary tools? What are the necessary processes and teams and requisite skill sets that you need to be able to perform that role? Because that is the opportunity as well that sits in front of all of us too. Because I think in many ways, we in security have a rightful, we can be the rightful heir to that role, which by the way, sits above CIO and CDO too. All right, So let's now project further though, and say what are we seeing emerge in the I don't know if it's the 2030s or maybe even sooner, but one of the ways that we can look at the progress of AI in general is to look at how models have been performing over the last couple of years. So this is a diagram that shows two dimensions. On one dimension is the accuracy or how well the model works, and the other dimension on the x-axis is how large the model is. So over time, models have gotten bigger. And what we've seen is that this very incremental improvement in the model accuracy as the models have gotten larger. This was up until about 2017 or so. Well, what happened around 2017 is we started to see this happen, where all of a sudden, as the model got larger, it started to get much better. And this was somewhat unexpected. In fact, so there's another way to look at this, and I'm going to use a diagram that my friend Gal used. Think of this as, so we have this curve on the bottom that reflects performance versus being general purpose. So you can have a model that's high performance, but it's only useful for this one really narrow sort of thing, or something that's general purpose, but it sucks from a performance standpoint. And over the years, as we've increased the model size, we've seen this trade-off still appear quite consistently. And so for many AI researchers, we felt, you know what, it's going to be a long while before we get to a point where you have a general purpose, high-performing system. Okay? But then we saw the curve on the right, and the shape of this curve started to look like this, where all of a sudden, this curve was something like GPT-2, okay? GPT-2 started to show capabilities that were wholly like, wow, this is unexpected and potentially dangerous, right? To GPT-3 to GPT-4. So if you're wondering why, well, so if you've wondered, wow, is this all hype? Like the thing that many researchers signed to say, let's not build bigger models until we figure out how to make this thing safe. It's because they don't know what this next curve is going to look like. And right now, the expectation, or if the curve continues to bend the way it is, then the belief is that we're going to end up with a curve that bends further out, enabling having a capability that is more general purpose and also highly performant. But in the same time, not sure what that will, what ramifications will emerge from that. So this is what we're going to see in the 2030s, right? As I mentioned earlier on, I can project what the problem. I was able to project what's going to happen in the 2020s about 7 years ago, saying we're going to see ransomware up the wazoo. In the 2030s, if not a little bit sooner, we're going to see someone's going to come up with, whether it's us or China or some other company that's going to build this next really, really large model. That's going to happen within the next decade easily. And so we need to be prepared. And the way that we can be prepared, aside from, there's a lot of dystopian scenarios here. But anyway, one of the ways we can be prepared is by understanding what this is. Understanding what is this new knowledge ecosystem and how do we leverage it, because it's coming fast and it's going to come upon us. And as I mentioned earlier, all the work that we're doing in security, while it's going to be useful for now, is not necessarily going to be as important as what's going to emerge in the near future. And the way I would think about that last piece is to say, some of you may have heard me talk about this, but a lot of us don't actually practice security. And you may wonder, like, well, hold on, wait. It's in my title, right? What we actually practice is safety. And if you're not sure of the difference between the two, we can add the word food in front of it. So what is food safety? Food safety is hygiene, it's compliance, it's inspections, it's good practices. Sounds like cybersecurity, right? What is food security? Those are things like, where's the baby formula that's missing? Where's the Ukrainian wheat? Those are things that are generally out of our control, okay? And we look at the government to help us address some of those concerns. Well, my argument for the future is when this thing starts to bow outward, our bigger concern is not AI security. Our bigger concern is AI safety, okay? So if AI safety is a big concern, then who better to capture this role than a whole bunch of people who've been practicing cyber safety for many years? And I would argue that in the role that we already practice today, which is more cyber safety than cyber security, we are much more able to make a claim for that role because we've been practicing digital safety. And really, we can pivot easily to AI safety as a result of that. So with that, any questions?
Sounil, have you put any thought into, because you use the term safety.
Use the mic.
Oh, sorry. So you put it in terms of safety, which I've always loved. And I started thinking about when you were showing the graphs is access to these systems, these technologies, and this information, potentially even wisdom. So is it also not a concern that there will be control over that people could use this in a bad way as well?
You mean the access to the knowledge?
Exactly. So access to even as a wisdom manager.
Yeah, definitely. So there's, it goes back to the need to know comment earlier. What we want is, we want to be able to share institutional knowledge, but also not violate either fiduciary responsibilities or need to know compartments and so on and so on. It is a challenge that we in the intelligence community face all the time. Like, how do you avoid a 9/11, but at the same time don't divulge things that other teams shouldn't know, right? Really hard problem, but one that now this type of technology could potentially enable, but also create additional challenges around. Is that what you're asking?
So it's more along the lines of, we know that the movie Idiocracy is coming true in the United States. So how do we prevent 1% of the population from controlling the knowledge while we all turn into idiots?
Oh. I can't solve that for you. Yes, but good question to ask. Yeah.
Hey, so you had mentioned what might happen in the 2030s. Do you think it might just move back into identity and start the process over again?
I've thought about that too and said, does it loop back and all of a sudden go back to identify again? And I think if there may be a whole, like, how do I identify AI systems? How do I protect AI systems? How do I detect, respond, recover from AI systems? That may play out too. But I think it will look and feel completely different than how we think about cybersecurity. It's going to be very much of a, how do we operate in this new type of, I'm not sure if I can even put it's like trying to stare at a 5-dimensional cube. You know, like, I can almost make out a 4-dimensional cube, but then the 5-dimensional cube just like, ugh. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I know the answer except to say, I know the shape of it, right? And that's kind of my point. I know the shape of a 4-dimensional cube. And if you watch Interstellar enough, you might still be able to get it. But now we're talking like a 5-dimensional cube, and to me, this is the shadow of that 5-dimensional cube, which is what this new era is going to look like. Like, what are these things? And again, I don't know the answer to all of them. And so we got to fill out what that shadow, what's the body of that shadow.
So on this chart, the references used earlier were from people who were studying human intelligence, and they derived those things that you mentioned early on in the talk. And you mentioned the wisdom, hey, half the people in the world don't have the wisdom, at least they don't think like me as far as what I think the right answer on how to do wisdom is. So what makes you think as that other curve bows out and we make computers smarter and smarter, What makes you think they won't have the same problems that humans have? We can't solve the problem for a human. How can we solve it for an artificial?
Oh, great question. Which is actually one of the reasons why I've been arguing I would rather make machines safe before they become secure, because if they're unsafe, and what's worse than an unsafe and insecure system is a unsafe, very secure system that we cannot break, okay? Yeah, so but just keep that in mind. An unsafe, very secure system is the worst case scenario for us, okay? So let's get the order of operation correct. Make the system safe, and then let's secure it and make sure it's secure, right? What was your question again?
If we can't solve the problem
Oh.
for humans, how do we expect to solve it for computers?
Yes. How do we expect to solve it for computers? Again, this is one of those, I don't know how to answer the question, except to say, how do we put it to our, how do we take this resource, this amazing resource, and put it towards good, meaningful purposes? And again, I think the shape of the shadow of that is here. Any technology will be wielded for very evil things as well. I mean, internet, classic example, right? So we're going to see the same thing here too. But you know, I think these are ways that we can make sure that it's being used well. In fact, I think I was talking to one of the frontier companies, and they mentioned like the 50% of the use cases, like what these tools are being used for today, like more than 50% is like bad stuff. Just bad stuff, right? So, and I think he was surprised because if for anyone who's been in network engineering for a long time, you know that for a long time, a good percentage of the traffic going across the internet was like really bad stuff, right? So in the same way, we're seeing that manifest here.
The telephone network before it.
Yes, exactly.
Just human nature.
Yep. So my answer to your question is, these machines are going to operate with the flaws that we've built into it, and will be abused for those reasons. These are ways that we can avoid, we can manage that abuse.
So we all know that no system which can't be abused won't be, right? We built the internet too quickly, interoperability, right? Forgot about security. Now here we are, decades later, doing it all over again. So is the answer going to Congress and legislating this stuff and adding more laws around it, or what's the so what part of this?
Yeah, the so what part of this is really this, going back to this notion of we didn't expect this curve to bow outwards. And because we didn't expect it to bow outwards, there are emergent things that are also unexpected and unpredictable. We frankly don't, we can imagine, there's a lot of scenarios we can imagine, and many of them end very badly. And this is why people do say this is, we should look at this as if we're building nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. And by the way, I should mention, this is not, the analogy I oftentimes give here is not because of malice. So it's like we have this magic lamp that we find, we rub it, genie pops out, say, hey, grant your wish. And you say, hey, I'm Midas. I'd like to turn everything I touch into gold. And you can see how that quickly becomes a curse. And so now we have all these magic lamps that are being given away to everyone and anyone who wants to use it. And we're not sure how many wishes, we're not sure how many undos we have. Did that answer your question?
It's a good, I mean, the real, would it help to go to the laws and changing some of the laws around this, or is that way too, are we not there yet?
When does that ever work?
Oh, no, it's work.
Right now, like you can't even pass a law to build a highway. So no.
Well, plus it only would deal with the U.S.
Yeah. Yes.
You made the laws that only criminals use the high tech.
There are norms that we could try to abide by. I mean, we have bioweapons norms. Unfortunately, you can ask ChatGPT how to create a bioweapon, but besides that point, we do have norms around, nations have said, look, we need to govern this because it could kill us all, right? So this is one of those situations where that conversation needs to happen. It needs to happen faster, and it needs to happen in a more concerted way. And I think the administration right now is actually like really paying attention to this and saying we need to come up with norms for everyone to abide by. Fortunately,
The norms put genies back into boxes, or do they put them underground?
Well, it's actually hard to put it underground because it requires huge amounts of computational power to do these curves, higher level curves. So right now, it's really, well, right, when I say right now, I mean like today, but as we know, Moore's law, blah, 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 10 years from now, you might be able to do one of these curves on your laptop. So that becomes problematic for obvious reasons. All right, well, that's a flavor of the philosophy track, a little bit of flavor of the philosophy track. And there's a whole bunch of other topics that we have lined up, but thank you for your attention. And let me turn it back over to, all right, sure, who? All house.